Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, not sure where you are when you're watching this, but I don't want us to fall behind. So I'm going to do some short AP style lessons as well as look a little bit at quotation marks. So this is not going to take long, but I really encourage you to take notes because what I'm going to show you is an important part of your communication skill set. So in every story is a where. And the type of stories that we're going to do, addresses are important. So this is a huge entry in the book. It's pretty long, but it's mostly examples. I recommend that you go back and look at the examples in the style guide and also in the study guide that I gave you. There are some things that you need to commit to memory, but they're super simple, and I'm going to show you what those are. So the big thing, first of all, is always use figures, always use numerals for a specific address. So we're not going to spell any numbers out here, right? Now here's what you need to remember. When we talk about a specific address, there are only 3 that you abbreviate when you have a specific address. Only these 3. Those are the ones you need to remember. You don't have to remember any of the other ones because you're always going to spell those out. So mark these down. These are the ones that you need to abbreviate in an online and a print story. So everything else spell out. So that's all you really need to remember here. And then compass points with a specific address. So when we talk about a general street name, we're going to spell everything out. But when I'm going to take you to a specific place, then I'm going to abbreviate these. And these are the most common in addresses, and I'm assuming that's why, right? So in a small town, you're not going to have a lot of north, south, east, west type streets. But when you get into a bigger city, you're going to run into that a little bit more. All right. So again, without a specific address, I'm going to spell everything out. Now, one thing too, this is part of a term called the plurals guidelines, but it's going to apply to a lot of different types of terms that we use. So I'm going to throw this in when it does. When I'm going to talk about 2 or more streets that are named street, right, then I'm going to lowercase that common noun element. The parade will go down first, main, first, and second streets. So again, this is common. This applies to addresses. If it's a street, the parade will go down Main Street and Second Boulevard. I'm not going to lowercase any of that stuff. But if I've got more than one and they all have that same common noun element, I'm going to lowercase that part. Now, with a general address, again, I'm going to spell out the compass point in there, right? Now, one thing I told you when we talked about numbers is 1st through 9th, you're going to always spell out, in 10th and above, you're going to use figures and the little superscripts. That guideline doesn't change no matter what you're talking about. So I like that one because it's always the same, right? So Franklin lives at 987 First Avenue. So I'm abbreviating avenue because this one of the things here, remember that we are going to abbreviate with a specific address, but I'm going to spell this out because I'm always going to spell that out, right? Now, here's one that's got all of it going on, 456 North 10th Street. So here I'm going to use 10th. I'm going to abbreviate street because that's one of the ones I abbreviate. And it's got a compass point, and we're all talking about a specific address. So specific address means you show me where this is and I can go and I can knock on the door and go there. So again, I'm hitting the high points here. You know you're going to see this in our writing. We're going to practice this. This is really important. Again, when you listen to news in a broadcast venue, you're not going to have the specificity that you're going to have here because it's just too hard to consume that when you're listening to it. Unless you live on that street or you know where that is, it's not going to matter. You're going to do more general landmarks. So you want to find out when you work in a place, even if you're doing online content, my assumption was going to be this is going to be your specific place where you can give some detail there. So ages, now addresses, we're always going to use figures unless we're doing 1st through 9th. Age is the same thing. When I say figure, I mean a numeral, so we're not going to spell anything out. And these are some things we've already talked about. When an age is a modifier, I'm going to hyphenate that. Now, it doesn't matter how small the age is, I'm going to still do it. And then compound nouns, we discussed that too. So that's when you have to ask yourself, is this coming before the noun, first of all, for the modifier, or is it the noun? Is it the subject of the sentence? So if it is, I'm going to have to put hyphens there. Now, we already talked about this too, but when you're using plurals, Blake is in his 30s, I'm going to put an S here. I don't have any apostrophe anywhere. There's no placeholder. It's not possessive. It's just more than one. So I'm going to do that. Now, we'll practice this because this is a little bit counterintuitive. You would never say this. Right? If I'm going to tell you the news, I'm going to say 10-year-old Eli has a 6-year-old sister. I'm going to put all those modifiers before. It just makes sense. But in print, we can get away with this because our brains can do it. In fact, it's actually easier to read than if I said 10-year-old Eli has a 6-year-old sister. That looks confusing when you try to read it. It's going to make sense to you when you write it because you know what you're talking about. But when you just put this before a reader who doesn't know anything, we got to wade through some things, right? So this makes a lot more sense to put the age in commas behind the word as a modifier. So surround that in commas. We'll practice that a little bit so that you feel more comfortable with it. Same thing here. Now, if a person is less than a year old, then you go by months for that. Typically, sometimes even up to 2 years, because each month is such a dramatic change in a small child's life, like 12 months and 18 months, they do different things. They're different. So you can really go, I think up to a year, I would do months, and then after that, I would use years. I don't think there's a guideline in there for that, but that pretty much makes more sense. So again, this is easy to do. This one's a little bit different than what you might think, but once you get used to it, you'll see how easy it is. And we've already talked about that, and I would throw in this morning, this afternoon, all this evening, all of that is the same, right? It doesn't make sense to the audience. The audience really doesn't get it because when you write it, it's going to be different from when you read it most of the time. Or you're going to make me have to look for a timestamp, and I don't have time for that, right? Now, if I'm telling you the story, if you're listening to me talk or you're watching me, then that makes sense because we're in the middle, we're together in this thing, right? So we understand the language. The only time you're not going to mess with this is if it's a direct quote. So if you're quoting someone and said, I killed him yesterday, I'm trying to think of when you would actually have that in a quote. It's possible. It's something that you really need that direct quote, right? It's much more powerful than to paraphrase it. Then I'm not going to mess with that, right? The date, we don't need. I'm going to tell you in class when we need the date. How do we do that? The only time we need the date is when the day of the week isn't clear. If it falls outside of the week coming or the week we just passed through, we're going to need the date. So we'll practice that. And even then, we only need the date. We don't need the year. So dates are a separate entry. We're going to do those when we meet again. So that's really the AP style that we would have for our first class this week. So let's look at quotation marks. This one, please do not do this. You rarely need quotation marks in your writing. So we really overdo them when we want to emphasize someone got tired of this here, right? So look, I love to take pictures of this stuff, so if you see something like this, let me know. But this person is right. You can italicize something, you can underline it, but even in the writing that we do, I'm going to tell you something. Well, first of all, periods and commas always, 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 always go inside the quotation marks. You're going to say, well, what about this? And I'm going to say always, right? No matter how the two come to be beside each other, that's the way it is. Now, if you travel in Europe, there's some stuff that grammar-wise doesn't work here, right? They put their periods and commas outside the quotation marks. There's also a lot of plural words that they use different verbs for. Anyway, I noticed that when I'm there. So it's a thing here. So if you travel, don't let it confuse you. About the other punctuation marks, it really depends on what's going on. So if the entire quote is a question, the question mark's going to go inside. So she asked, comma, did he remember to call mom? That's all a question. So that's going to go inside, right? Same thing here. Exclamation. This is exclamation point worthy, so I would do that. But if the statement is a question, but it's not a direct quote, then I'm going to put it outside. Now, we'll talk about this in just a sec. This is the name of a book, and it's in quotation marks. So that's why those quotation marks are here, but this whole thing is not a quote. So the question mark is outside. So you have to kind of think about what you're trying to do, what's going on here, and this is not hard at all, right? So colons and semicolons, I honestly had to make this up because I don't think you're ever going to have this situation, although it can happen. Every holiday we sing Silent Night, colon, our favorite Christmas carol. Now, I can put a comma. If I did, guess where it's going to go? Right inside this quotation mark. See? So if I had a comma there, semicolon, outside, right? If I had a period, and I made a new sentence, actually a really short sentence is pretty powerful. I might do that instead. Then I'm going to put a period inside that quotation mark. Single quotes, don't use them anymore. I don't know what it is. We feel like we have to do those all the time. You don't do anything with them. The only time you have it is a quote within a quote. So here's the book. Remember, books are surrounded in quotation marks. And so read the book To Kill a Mockingbird before tomorrow morning, the teacher ordered. That's a terrible quote. But anyways, got it? Only a quote within a quote. Now, that's going to happen when you interview people. Because people we'll talk about this again later on the semester when we do interviews, but often people will tell you what they thought about something. So maybe you're interviewing me and I would tell you, I thought to myself, why am I hearing that noise? But then I just kept on going, right? So what that thought that I'm telling you is like, I'm talking to me. That would be a quote within a quote. So I would surround that in single quotes within that. So I'll show you that. You're not going to see complicated examples like that on the exam or in any of the quizzes, but I just wanted to tell you that. So in the AP style, we're going to do this again some more because we're going to talk about composition titles. But periods and commas always go inside quotation marks. That's the first thing you need to remember. Second, drop the single quotes. The only time you need them is a quote within a quote, and that's not going to happen too much, right? Composition titles are the names of things people create. You cannot, so wake up for this part. Italics and underlines are never an option in Associated Press style. You don't get that choice. You do not get to underline and you do not get to italicize. The only thing you get to do is a quotation mark. So when I'm talking about a book, I'm going to put quotation marks around it. A poem, a song, a TV show and a movie, magazine and newspaper article, a play. So they're probably more than that. An artwork like the Mona Lisa. Something someone creates. That is a composition. So I'm going to put quotation marks around it. Now notice I'm going to tell you magazine and newspaper articles are the name of a television special. So I should include that here. That's a composition. That one thing is going to have quotation marks around it, right? However, I am not going to put quotation marks around the names of newspapers and magazines. So if I wrote, my roommate works for the Reveille, that's the name of a newspaper, I'm going to leave it alone. Don't do anything to that. Now, don't worry about that right now. We're going to tend to that later when we do composition titles in AP style. But that's it. That's it for today. So you made it through, and I will see you in the next class.